One. Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Amen. And joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky on Sheikh Chesed, New York City. We're recording this day 216 of the hostages, praying for their release, praying that they're alive, and linking ourselves with Klal Yisrael in the solidarity of the days of anguish that we are experiencing, and thinking through Torah as a way of finding comfort and a way of anchoring ourselves in a very challenging time. And this, of course, is also on the calendar this week, Aseret Yemei Hoda'ah, 10 days of gratitude. We commemorated Yom HaShoah earlier in the week on Sunday evening, Monday, and we are working towards Yom HaZikaron, Yom Ha'atzmaut. These are important days in a complicated time this year. These are complicated observances this year. And yet we are here and thinking about all of this, and of course, experiencing these different moods, albeit so many thousands of miles away. But we are here to talk about Kedoshim, Parashat Kedoshim, which I want to say is an amazing parsha. It is it's so even the claim that this is an important parsha, or one of the most important parshiot, is a claim that, of course, will invite its debaters. But I'll make that claim that it's one of the most important parshiot because it has so many central ideas in it, so many important laws in it, and so our conversation here is going to, just focus in on not the specifics of each and every law. There are so many laws, like 48, 50 individual laws in this parsha. But what's the place of this parsha? And specifically, I want to put a couple of ideas out there for us to discuss. And that is, how does this compare to Aseret HaDibrot, to the Ten Commandments? Commentaries already all the way back to the Midrashim have found a linkage between this parsha and the Ten Commandments. Is that deliberate? Is there a program here? Is there something here? And then what defines the Ten Commandments as in terms of it as literature, as opposed to this? So compare and contrast the Ten Commandments with the Leviticus 19, what we call the Holiness Code. Who would like to begin?
You have to call on one of us.
I'll call on you, Jeremy, since you answered.
Neither of us will shut up then.
I'm just pressing play.
Okay. Well, this is like an incredibly central parsha. Nobody would disagree with this. I mean, I think that contemporary liberal Jews, because it includes the prohibition on homosexuality, like, Parashat Kedoshim, they don't want to see that as obviously a very jarring thing to the contemporary, shul audience. I mean, over the years, I've had people, get up and leave. I was a kid in the shul who, one day came with his parents to shul and went away for 5 years after that because he was so hurt. So, it's worth noting that fact. But with the whole sweep of the parsha, it is the picture of shaping an excellent Jewish life. It is the aspiration to be holy, and it locates it in one other thing that is not true in the Ten Commandments. In fact, maybe it's the opposite of true in the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments, they go to Mount Sinai, they come to this locale, which is quaking. There's earthquakes, there's thunder, there's lightning. The pyrotechnics of the delivery scare the pants off them. They run away. And in Exodus 19, in Exodus 19, the Ten Commandments are an extremely transcendent God,
yes,
from heaven comes down to the mountain, and the people at the bottom of the mountain, and scares the pants off of them. Leviticus 19 says, Kedoshim tihiu ki kadosh ani, you can be holy, not the same way I can be holy, but we have a comparable, there is a correlation between human holiness and divine holiness. And so if Exodus would scare the pants off of you, Leviticus, in this respect, says, here are a set of behaviors which can refine you, which can ennoble you, which can sanctify you. And that's, I would say, very, very central to the self-conception of a Jew. Living the life of mitzvot makes you a holy person. And that's pretty great.
So, and Barry, how would you?
Well, I would note that the centrality of the Parsha is represented by the idea that the central verse of the Torah, according to the rabbis, is in this Parsha. That you should love your neighbor as yourself, which is believed to be the exact center of the Torah. What I would also note, though, is that the Ten Commandments is a polished work in that it's a text that flows very well. It's easy to diagram. And that's not true of our Parsha, where it's not always clear what the connection is between laws that appear side by side. So as we were talking before the show, there's a mythic element to the Ten Commandments, where really the key, as Jeremy mentioned, is chapter 19 of Exodus, which describes the event. And in a certain sense, the text of the Ten Commandments is subordinate to the event. In chapter 19, the substance of the chapter is law. And as, again, we were talking before, it seems to me it's an attempt to take holiness out of the temple and into the community. And the importance of it, first of all, it's in a priestly document, a document composed by priests reflecting priestly concerns, whether we identify it with traditionally with P, the priestly author, or H, the holiness code. But it does speak to this idea that holiness is incumbent upon all of us, and the vehicle to holiness is in all aspects of life, not just in temple sacrifice and cultic worship.
So I think that that's I just want to underscore that point. It's an important point that for the first, 17, 18 chapters of Leviticus, we've been concentrating on ritual worship, issues pertaining to personal, purity, impurity, and the like, things that we, the three of us traditionally talk about. They're far removed from our world. Sacrifice is far removed from our world, and the scale disease and the purification process and all that. Notwithstanding the fact that each one of those things is fascinating on its own, and we, the three of us, can certainly figure out ways to contemporaneize, to make it contemporary, and to understand that and to appreciate that. And what you're saying, so Barry, you're saying that we're adding a sphere here. We're kind of like making the diameter or the circumference of holiness a little larger than the temple. That the temple, that holy living is not simply about which animal you're going to bring and slaughter and what's going to take place between you and a Kohen. It's what takes place between you and your neighbor. Lo tignovu, lo tichachashu, lo tishakru, ish bamito. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not be deceitful to your neighbor. And those are ideas, principles, laws that are about constructing a society and telling
this is what you're saying now is really, really important. Like the first 15, 16 chapters, it was about the place, the central place, the Mishkan, or the ritual space that would succeed the Mishkan, the various kinds of altars that may have existed in Israelite society in Bible times, but not a constant. Vayikra doesn't know. Vayikra does not know. Vayikra never says. Leviticus never says that thing that is the most important thing in the book of Deuteronomy. One shrine, only one shrine. No altars in your local places. Only one national altar. Vayikra doesn't know that and doesn't appear to believe it. So, but the holiness for the majority of the book, or the first 15, 16 chapters of the book, is about the rituals that happen in that sacred place, the sprinkling of the blood and the offering of the animal. And then you start to get this holiness code. But the holiness code, as like scholarly writers have pointed out, there appear to be two different things. And one of them is that the priests are especially holy people. And we're going to get that in particular in Parshat Emor, the next one, where here's a verse early in Parshat Emor, next week's reading. Kedoshim yihiyu leElohehem. Those priests should be holy to their God. B'lo yechalalu shem Elohehem, and they shouldn't desecrate the name of their God. Ki et ishe Adonai lechem Elohehem hem makribim, because they offer the food of the Lord, the sacrifices at some point being seen as like feeding God. V'hayu kodesh, and so they should be holy, and so they can't marry, this or that person, and they can't come into contact with death, and they, all those priestly specific things. And here's another verse now. Elechem Elohecha hu makriv. Priest is offering the food of the Lord. Kodesh yihielach. He should be holy to you. Ki kadosh ani Adonai mekadishchem, because I, the Lord, am holy. That's like an assertion that it's not the place and the actions, it's the people who do the actions who have a separate kind of sanctity. In contrast to that, chapter 19 in Kedoshim, which is our parsha this week, is that it is not those same verbs. Kedoshim yihiu, no. Kedoshim tihiu, all of you. You should all be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. It's not because you operate in the sanctuary. It's because this society, where, in all the things that you said, where we don't lie, and we don't cheat, and we don't curse, and we don't exploit, and we pay our just debts, and we do all of these, love your neighbor as yourself kind of behaviors, that's where holiness resides.
So it's a democratization of holiness, basically. And it's really struggling with this idea. I mean, as you say correctly, I mean, that we're having this parsha next week with the holiness is vested in these people, but Kedoshim here, chapter 19 of Leviticus, is saying holiness is accessible to everybody. Not everybody's going to be a Kohen, but you have access to the holy because you can live a holy life.
What I would add is that it makes the community the locus of holiness.
100%.
Very often we think of holiness as a withdrawal from community, and Leviticus 19 emphasizes that holiness can only be found in the community.
Yeah. Well said. We don't have, in this religion, we really don't have a hermitage type of thing. We do have we do kind of valorize and praise the great scholar, and by definition that's like a little bit of a monastic profession, but it's not done alone. It's done with chabruta, and it's done with study partners and stuff like that. So being a great scholar, in principle, should mean togetherness with other people, not isolation, even if in practice maybe there is sometimes isolation. But we don't have this. If you're really holy, you should be sitting on top of a mountain meditating. No, if you're really holy, you should pay your debts, and you should treat your workers fairly, and you shouldn't lie.
I asked the two of you before we started recording, if you had a choice as teachers to teach the Ten Commandments, whether it's the Exodus version or the Deuteronomy version, chapter 19-20 of Exodus, let's say, take the Exodus version versus these chapters, and focus on chapter 19 of Leviticus, from Kedoshim to you, ending up with, let's say, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, chapter 19, verse 18. If you had the choice between teaching the Ten Commandments as a text versus teaching Kedoshim, which would you choose? And both of you and so we were unanimous that we would all choose Kedoshim. And that, I think, says a lot. It says that this is a fundamentally pedagogical text. That is, it's accessible to us in a way that any one of us could fairly easily use some strategies to teach this text. Whereas the other text is more, and we use the word mythic in the sense that it creates an emotional awe reaction. This is not about awe necessarily. This is about answering certain questions relating to how you live. For example, I mean, go to the first verse, which is Ishimo vaviv tira'u ve'et shabtotai tishmoro. A person should revere their mother and father and keep my Sabbaths. Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am the Lord your God. And I'm citing this pasuk, and I'm relating this with a certain fondness because among the first things I can remember learning as a young person in the 7th grade were these verses. We had a wonderful teacher. I had a wonderful class in this, and we studied this. We studied this, really deep. What is the connection between the between Shabbat and between and parents, and what's the relationship between these two verses? Is it simply, rattling off a series of commandments, or is there a connection? And they drew the connection, the fact that everybody is involved, the family is involved in Shabbat observance, and that there are situations where there are conflicts in a family, and of course we could all relate to that on some level. And my point is that I think Kedoshim invites the pedagogic conversation as opposed to the 10 Commandments, which only invites the response of Naseh v'nishma, right? And I think you become a Jew with both texts, of course, but your opening to becoming a learner is probably Leviticus and not Exodus.
One way in which I think that you're really onto something here. Obviously, it's not that the Exodus account of the 10 Commandments is somehow like deficient or uninspiring. No, it's a pretty important text, and you would never diminish its massive importance in the Torah. It's revelation. It's Ma'amad Har Sinai. It's the power of it is amazing, and it's not really at human scale. God comes from heaven, and the mountains quake, and the whole thing is on fire. Ad leva shamayim. And the people do say, okay, Na'aseh v'nishma, but they also run away. And that they run away and they stand at a distance. God in that scene is kind of like blowing their minds, and they don't have an intimacy. This one, most of the 10 Commandments, as we've alluded to, are in here. There's no idol worship. There's keep Shabbat. There's honor your parents. There's no lying. There's no there's no adultery. All those things are in this passage, but it's a lot more human scale, and it's just quantitatively more mitzvot, but it's human scale, and it says things like, you're going to be farmers, and some of your crops have to go to feed the poor. You can't reap to the edge of your field, which to me is a wonderful, it's not only a behavior, you have to feed the poor, but it's an attitude. Do not try to get every drop of profit out of your land. Share. Don't put a stumbling block before the blind. This is obvious. Don't literally trip people, or figuratively, as the halakhic tradition has, try to put people in bad situations, give them bad advice, try to exploit them. But also don't curse the deaf, which is really interesting because the blind person will fall because you put the stumbling block. The deaf person will remain blissfully ignorant of the mean thing that you said. Even if it doesn't hurt them, it diminishes you yourself. You become a cruel person. Don't lo tisnata chicha bilvavecha. You have the capacity to hate people. Well, don't do that. Don't hate people. Learn to love. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. This is so much more at human scale about shaping the personality that we want a good Jew to be.
So this is what we call gufei Torah, and I'm going to ask you to give me the best translation of gufei Torah, Jeremy.
I would say we talked about this a little bit before we went on, and sitting in front of these wonderful machines, I typed stuff up and called some references out of the great Torah bookshelf, and Rashi tells us that it is the great reasons for the Tamei Torah, the Gufei Torah, which he's quoting now from a different tractate, tractate Chulin. He tells us that Ta'amim Gidolim, these are the great reasons for behaving as a Jew. Okay, another medieval commentator, Menachem HaMeiri from the 14th century in Provence, says that the great benefit will come to human beings from understanding what's between the lines here. What do these things really mean? So I think that those medieval authorities say that the stuff that comes out of don't hate, learn to love, don't exploit. These are the things, these are the mottos which shape what a person could be, and you'll be a better person for it.
Or underlying principles, the undergirding principles
Underlying principles.
Of the whole Torah are here. And again, this is why, and I love the when you said, this brings it at a human scale. Look, the Ten Commandments certainly are, have principles here. They're just, I think, and it's important to study it. And I've given my classes on the Ten Commandments. I love teaching the Ten Commandments too. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, I think we should all learn them. We should all study them, and we should all understand their central place, their iconic place within both Judaism and human civilization. Absolutely. But in terms of learning how to live, and in terms of your day-to-day function of assessing your conduct and measuring yourself, and what we basically call ethics, it's like someone asks you directions, to get somewhere, and if you tell them the wrong directions and you don't know anything, you don't know what you're telling the person, that's lifnei verloti b'netin mikshol. You're putting a stumbling block before the blind. I think what the Kedoshim text enables you to apply, or to study, to learn, to internalize principles, and then when you live your life, apply them to various situations. Barry, you want to get in here, no?
Yeah, so it's interesting that I would say that Leviticus 19 is about living a Jewish life, and the Ten Commandments is perhaps a little more universal. Except for the commandment about the Shabbat, any self-respecting monotheist can embrace all the other commandments. Leviticus is really addressed to Jews, and I find fascinating Ibn Ezra's comment, because as we've noted, the beginning of the verse is Daber el kol adat b'nei Israel. Moses is supposed to speak to the entire community of Israel. And Ibn Ezra says that's to include converts as well, because they also are warned about the sexual prohibitions that are mentioned in the beginning. And what I find interesting is that he goes on to say that this kind of holiness, preserving a sexual ethic, is not the sole reason why the people will remain in the land, but it is an important part of it. And there is an element of differentiation implied by the term holiness, which means ultimately, I think, to separate oneself from something. And there's a kind of a tension between the universal and the particular that plays itself out here in chapter 19, which I don't think we necessarily see in the Ten Commandments.
Mm-hmm. So how about we again, we can think about the way that these texts play themselves out in Jewish life. We give a certain measure of honor to the iconic place of the Ten Commandments, and there is a history to this, and at some point something becomes a canonical text, or it becomes part of liturgy. I was thinking, in connection with Yom Ha'atzmaut coming up, the Israel Independence Day, that in our world, in the Masorti world in Israel, and certainly in a world that is trying to figure out rituals, the chanting of Megillat Ha'atzmaut, the Scroll of Independence, is becoming is assuming a certain place within the context of observing this day. After all, we get to this day and we're thinking, okay, what do you say? Well, you can say a bunch of things. There are lots of things to say, Hallel and all that. But is there any text, any canonical text? And would the chanting of Megillat Ha'atzmaut, the Scroll of Independence, provide some of that in a way of taking that text outside of its, historical context and actually making it, iconic in a liturgical way, which is the reverse of saying, Kedoshim is a text that doesn't have a liturgy to it. It's not a liturgical thing. It's a text that is to be memorized, to be studied, to be pored over, to be thought through, to shape your consciousness.
But it is liturgical because it's part of our weekly Torah reading, which is a liturgy in part.
Right.
Not exclusively.
I mean, sort of, but it is. I think of the Kriyat HaTorah, the Torah reading, as ritualized study. Like
Okay.
Shema Yisrael, I would call Psukei de Zimra, the Amidah. Those things are liturgy. I would say that Shema is kind of ritualized study, repeating a passage that we are supposed to. And I would say that the Torah reading the same. By the way, about the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, as some of our folks out there know, I was unhappy with the prayer for the state. A couple, related to the current government, or the government before the war government, and the presence of the extreme right wing in it. And so, and rewrote the prayer for the state, which included the phrase, which is like the centerpiece phrase of our version, my version of the prayer, is calling on the leaders and Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, every citizen of Israel. Nice maneuver here on my part. Took the biblical phrase Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, meaning every Jew, and now in my prayer it means every Israeli, including the non-Jews. L'kayem medina mushtetet al yisodot ha'cherut hatzedek v'hashalom la'or chazonam shel nevi'ei Yisrael, which that's a quotation from the Declaration of Independence, to maintain a state founded upon the principles of cherut, tzedek v'shalom, freedom, justice, and peace, according to the visions of Or Chazonam Shel Nevi'ei Yisrael, according to the vision of the biblical prophets. So, in my own teeny tiny New York City way, I liturgicalized the Megillat Ha'atzmaut.
Well, you mashed it up.
I mashed it up. I cut, I pasted. I came, I saw, I conquered. I cut, I pasted, I davened.
All that's left now is to make a rap out of it.
But now,
But what I think what's important about Megillat Ha'atzmaut, and why I think a recitation of it on Yom Ha'atzmaut is so important, is that it is as good a claim as any to the Jewish claim to the land of Israel. And it's one that can satisfy both the religious and the secular, which of course was one of the issues in 1948, fashioning a document that could appeal to a wide variety of Jews who wanted and needed to live together. But the other part of the Declaration of Independence is that it's also aspirational. It makes some claims that perhaps have not yet come to pass in the 75 years of Medinat Yisrael, but are always worth keeping in mind as a direction that we're supposed to travel to in the unfolding of our individual and communal lives.
So we can conclude with this idea: is Kedoshim an aspirational text, or is Kedoshim a kind of not liturgical, but a didactic text? That is to say, when you have your questions about how to live, look into this text, and you'll discern the ethical principles. And this is a practical text. This is not an aspirational text. This is an application text.
I think it's both, because there's the phrase of things being necessary but not sufficient. So what's necessary in chapter 19 is adherence to all the laws in their manifold variety. The hope is that when we actualize these laws in our life, we will in fact become more godlike to the extent that human beings can, and we will approach ever more closely to the God who is holy.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I entirely get the distinction that you're trying to come up between those two things. Any law book, it seems to me, is aspirational in the sense that it doesn't describe what people do, it prescribes what people should do. So that to me is aspirational by almost by definition.
Right, but the goal of following laws in New York, for example, or in the United States, which is incumbent upon us, is not to become a holy people.
No, right. But any law book, whether it says, listen, drive 65 miles an hour and not faster, is aspirational. And it says, here's how you should behave. You should be honest in your documents. And if you lie, it's a crime. And da, 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 da. If, you know, and thinking about, you know, a trial going on in Lower Manhattan, even as we speak right now. And our Parsha, which when it says things like, listen, when strangers come reside with you, you have to treat them fairly. It's A, aspirational because it says how people should behave so to be holy. It's B, at least a little realistic because they wouldn't legislate something if the bad thing weren't happening. Like nobody ever has to say, you know, please don't eat mud. It's forbidden for you to eat mud. The Torah wouldn't consider mud to be treif because nobody's eating mud. But they have to say, listen, when the stranger comes, don't exploit them. You have to love the soul. Because you know what it's like to be a stranger. That's aspirational in the context of some people are not nice and some people do trip up the blind and some people do curse to death. So please stop doing that.
Right. Okay. But you know, reading the the IRS code, let's say, which is, you know, what you should do for insomnia, is not it's not going to answer the question how to be a good citizen. It's going to answer the question how do I get through, how do I pay my taxes, basically, or how do I pay less taxes? This is trying to answer the question, how do I live as a holy person, as in a holy people? And I'm going to add, it's also answering how to think, because when I take the text as a unit, I do think differently afterwards. The text invites me to approach the world through these situations where I have to be a little more compassionate. I have to be a little more concerned. I have to, for example, you know, lo tamod adam re'echa, don't stand idly by. I have to work on myself to know that I can't just be a bystander. I have to be activated in some way when I see suffering or I see my neighbor suffering. Um, and those things make challenges on me in terms of my thinking, my well-being, and you know, my humanity. It's not the you know the IRS manual. It's not that. It's something beyond that, and it's taking us to a different place, which is, I think, the intent here, and which is why it's going to always generate this kind of conversation. Barry, last word.
Yeah, so what I would say is that in Exodus 19, chapters 19, the description of the event, and 20, the Ten Commandments, exist side by side. The holiness is really addressed in chapter 19. I think the only mention of holiness in the Ten Commandments is with respect to Shabbat. But in chapter 19 of Leviticus, holiness and this idea that I am the Lord your God, or I am God, is interwoven with the laws and cannot be separated out so easily. And I think that was the point I was trying to get at, that this is a program for living a holy life, and we hope that in so doing, we will actually achieve the holiness that we seek.
Very nice.
Very nice. Good way to
And you know, one of the laws, this appears in and more again next week in a strong way, but also like if you offer your child to Molech, right? If you offer your child to firstborn child to the foreign god, and it said make them pass through fire. I don't know if that means a ritual passing through fire or literally burning the child, whatever it means. You know what happens? Because lechalel ulechalel et shem kodshi, you desecrate my holy name.
Yeah.
And this goes in a pair. It's exactly as you said. Each of these mitzvot are punctuated with, I am the Lord. You can be like me. You can resemble me in holiness. There is a correlation between you and me. And by the way, if you screw it up and if you are cruel and idol worshiping and all those bad things, my name also gets sanctified. So the divine is, God in search of man, right? The divine is dependent on this community that lives this out for real.
Very well said.
Good way to conclude, and to think about all of these different ideas about living as a holy people, and shaping our thoughts and shaping the way we organize our lives around this. So thank you to all of our viewers, our listeners. We're thinking about you. We're experiencing all of these different emotions during these days. Looking forward to the commemorations that are coming in the coming week. We wish a Chag Sameach, as complicated as it is in this time, that there should be a joyous and quiet and meaningful experience of Israel's independence, 76 years, and that we should all be able to meet again. And thank you for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you on the next edition of Parasha Talk. Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.